How many of you take insulin or know someone who does? Wow, a lot of you. And how many of you eat hard cheeses, like Parmesan, Swiss, or cheddar? Yes. Now, would you care if I told you both insulin and hard cheeses are made from genetically modified organisms? I cared. Insulin is great because it saves lives. Cheese is great because it makes life worth living. But when you add GMOs to the equation, I feel uneasy, scared, disdainful even. Yet I wouldn't have been able to tell you why. I couldn't have given you the rational basis for my feelings. This is an example of using mental shortcuts to decide what is good and what is bad. We all take shortcuts, every day, often without realizing. They're necessary to avoid cognitive overload and often helpful as they build on stories we've heard before. But they're not foolproof. The consequence of using mental shortcuts is that we don't stop to weigh the pros and cons, and we don't stop to check if our conclusions are consistent with our beliefs. And that can get us into trouble, especially with high-stakes decisions like what food we eat. Food is core to our survival. It's sustenance. By 2050, the global population is expected to rise by 50%, while arable land is expected to degrade even faster. And our food system already accounts for over a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. How can we possibly feed the world in a sustainable way? Technological innovations like lab-grown meat or RNAi pesticides are few budding answers to that question. But they're novel and uncertain to many of us, and our shortcuts tend to push us to reframe innovation as scary or risky. Let's talk about reframing food innovation. Because for these technologies to be successfully developed and adopted, the science needs to work, of course. But you and I also need to see them as part of our future, because we have a say through our wallets, social circles, and elected officials. Over the last 8 years, I've studied how our shortcuts can lead to irrational decisions, as well as how to override them. With this expertise in behavioral science, I helped design marketing strategies for Fortune 500 companies with the goal of changing consumer behavior. Most notably, I helped a COVID vaccine manufacturer understand the shortcuts leading to vaccine hesitancy and design a communication strategy to cut through them. The key to changing behavior, I learned, is to change the framing. I'll share my own story of recognizing, then overriding shortcuts in order to reframe genetic modification, one example of food innovation, and share why reframing is important for all of us. Genetically modified organisms have had their genes altered in a lab, sometimes by introducing genes from other plants or animals. When I heard that, my mind went to Frankenfood. A tomato with fish gills, a corn cob with caterpillar legs. I didn't want to know more. I was averse to ambiguity, in this case, a less familiar form of food production, regardless of whether or not it could be good for me. I also remember hearing about Monsanto, one company behind GMO development. The media mentioned it sued farmers for replanting rather than rebuying their genetically modified seeds. When I heard that, my mind went to David and Goliath. Monsanto was Goliath. Monsanto was the face of GMOs. Therefore, GMOs were bad. I didn't want to know more. Instead, I reactively devalued any information from GMO companies after that, including the research on GMO safety, because I didn't like the source. Ambiguity aversion and reactive devaluation are two of the many shortcuts I took in evaluating GMOs. It wasn't until last year, when I was researching my own answers to that question of how can we possibly feed the world in a sustainable way, that I was forced to revisit GMOs. As part of this research, I spoke to nearly 50 food experts, from plant geneticists to organic farmers, and learned that GMOs can actually help us tackle big global issues like climate change, nutrition, food security. Farmers in India and Bangladesh may not lose their entire rice crop to flooding through genetic modification to withstand submergence. And a farmer in Tanzania can feed his family and send his kids to school with the tripled yield of his maize crop through genetic modification to tolerate drought. And nearly 500,000 children around the world may not go blind every year due to vitamin A deficiency if golden rice, a genetically modified variety that can help combat this deficiency, were widely available. It was developed in the 1990s and yet grown for consumption for the first time only in 2022, nearly 30 years later. Now, not all GMOs have been rejected by us, though. Nearly 200 million people around the world take insulin, which is made from genetically modified bacteria. And nearly 90% of the hard cheeses eaten in the US are made with genetically modified enzymes called rennet, which previously we could only get from killing young cows, and that also made cheese more expensive. The framing of saving lives for insulin and making cheese more affordable and humane for rennet nudged me to see the benefits of this technology, whereas Frankenfood and Goliath pushed me to only see its risks. The difference in framing led me to view the same technology as good in one case and bad in another. When I changed the framing of genetic modification to saving lives, I started to see the benefits. It made me wonder, what other innovations could I be holding back due to my own shortcuts? And if all of us are doing this, then what is the opportunity cost on a global level? We need to reframe food innovation. Here's what helped me. First, I pushed myself to articulate the rational basis for why I didn't like a particular technology. When I couldn't, I knew there were holes in my frame. Second, I tried perspective taking of those with a different view. In my case, experts who advocate for this technology to combat my confirmation bias. And third, I changed my reference point from what we have to lose to what we stand to gain, to not be too anchored on the risks. Consider trying this approach too. Next time you're facing an unfamiliar food technology, ask yourself, am I being rational? Why might someone have a different view than mine? And what can be the upside of innovation? Then, we can make choices rooted in rational hope rather than irrational fear. And we have so much to hope for because we have budding solutions to not just feed, but nourish future generations.